Today's video is, it's a quote, the highest version of ourselves is the lowest standard we are accepting. And here, whoop, the highest version of ourselves is the lowest standard we are accepting. Some YouTube, some guy, I think it's James Clear, the guy who did Atomic Habits. And he basically describes how our life always falls down to the systems that we have in it. It's beautiful because he approaches the systemization of our habits. Very good book. I would recommend it to anyone. He actually takes you in detail of variable things that, whether we like to admit it or not, actually impact our days. And it's basically his journey writing and how he became a better writer because he kind of like wanted to write. And he didn't know how to start, so he started writing every day, and then he realized he's more successful writing, not really writing successful things, when he follows certain patterns. And then he realized the entire life that he had was based on standards that he had already placed before. So the systems that were running these standards were the ones that were dominating his day-to-day activities. So the entire book basically discusses how we kind of like change our habits and adapt to our new ways of living. And it's a better way for us to kind of like be the ones creating them instead of allowing them to allowing our environment to interfere. I'm not gonna kid you, man. I've known this stuff for a while, and I've been trying to apply it, attempting various ways of applications, because I think individually every one of us kind of like feels comfortable in certain things and not others. So it's really catered to our own personal adjustment. But so I couldn't, for the fuck of me, man, remember this quote. His quote was, "We always fall back to the lower standards that we to the standards that we have, to the to the systems that we have." And it's very Taoisty. If you're familiar with the Tao describes water in such a beautiful way. Because water always follows lower ground. And in a way, we always kind of like find the path, the water always follows the path of least resistance. And in a way, we always kind of like flow better when they're on the paths of least resistance. And even though we don't like our days, for example, when we watch way too much TV, the reason we watch too much TV is because it was a path of least resistance. It's just like kind of like becomes a habit, or it is a habit, or it's just something that's not very active from you, or whatever. Anyway, your psychology kind of like builds itself. But here, the highest version of ourselves is the lowest standard we are accepting. But it truly means we are at our best depending on what we're standing on that's the most stable. And so I'm not going to go towards the financials of it. But if I'm not really like getting a job done that I wanted to get done, maybe that's a standard I set myself to, that I can't actually get it done. If I can't speak to people the way I would want to speak to people, maybe not speaking to people well is the actual current standard. And if we approach how we do things as the bare minimum, or our interaction with the bare minimum, then at the very least we'll be able to visualize our limits. We'll be able to visualize where we are and how we actually allocate our energy as we process in the future. I said future. We could look at ourselves right now and project where we'll be based on the things that we do right now. Fair? So basically, we could actually sit with ourselves, But what are we looking at if not for the standards we're applying into this world that we share together? It's those standards that are actually going to be repeating themselves or calling out for us to act upon them. And it feels it's like the opposite side of a belief is a standard because you have a certain belief in you that creates a certain standard. And that standard is what the world sees, and that belief is what you actually like show the world, what you use to express yourself. So for the past couple of videos, I've been discussing beliefs and the depth of the beliefs. And it only makes sense for 3, 4, 5 videos down the line for standards to start showing up. Okay. And so like, what would the higher version of myself have as a standard? That's a question I'm thinking of right now. Or what would be a standard that brings out a better version of myself? So this also reminds me of a manga I was reading called Blue Lock, and I've recommended it many times on this channel. It's basically football players that are building the ego of the best striker in the world. Like, how does the best in the world come to become the best in the world? And for it's simple, right? Because if you're training bodybuilding, then basically you have your body responding in size to like the exercises you do. And if you want to be the best in the world, you kind of like have some point of what the best looks like. And to be the best means you actually have to surpass that. And then basically you approach things a certain kind of way and all that good stuff. And so that's the feedback that we want in order for us to kind of like, we want to be able to see our standards now and kind of like compare them to the standards that we want. So like we're looking at ourselves right now and comparing it to the ideal self. And so here it's the highest version of ourselves. And I'm right now I'm isolating the highest version of ourselves right now is based on the lowest standard we are accepting, which means our ideal self is basically gonna come with the standard that we haven't really reached yet. Because ideally, I would want to be A, B, C. No. Ideally, my behavior should be A, B, C, D, E. It's not about me. It's not about I. I don't want to be anything because I want to be as true to myself as possible. And I am right now as true to myself as possible. But the problem is, my standards right now, the version of myself that exists right now, is based on standards that have been accepted or that have been acceptable for the current self that I am in. Because in the future, I don't really accept them. In the present, I should not really accept them. Because if I don't accept the standards I'm in right now, then ultimately I'm going to shift to the new standard. And the highest version of myself is always going to move towards my ideal version. She reminds me I want to write something after I'm done with this. I've written it many times before, but I want to go back and look at it. I want to see like what is it? What is this standard that I already written before? And I want to see how close am I to it, or is it actually something that I could actually engage with or interact with? It is something I can engage with and interact with. See how my mind kind of like is pushing stuff instead of dealing with it at the moment? And we're looking at this note, like I'm interacting with you right now with the highest version of myself. But is this the version of myself that I'm okay with? Is this a standard? The standard that built me here is the one thing I could change. Because instead of trying to change myself, let me actually change the standard, which is reflected in my behavior, or at the very least in my actions and decision making. So if I approach the standard and I go like, okay, this is not up to par, this is not up to par, this is not up to par, then ultimately when I reach par, I'm looking at myself differently. And I'm seeing myself as a newer version or a higher or the higher or I'm seeing the higher version of myself based on the new standard, which is change overall. Meaning I'm more impactful when I'm accepting that I will always be this way, but raising my standards so that this way is the best possible way to actually be. So there's the objective approach and the subjectivity behind it, because I love myself and I am right now the highest version of myself, but it doesn't mean this is a standard that I'm okay with having. And so as long as I'm able to compare my standard today to myself today from myself of yesterday, I'll be able to see the difference in standards. And every step forward is basically going to create this shift where any present moment, I'm always at the highest version until eventually I reach an ideal version where my beliefs probably are just kind of like non-existent, because there's nothing to have as a belief, because there's one thing that you are present in the moment, and that's basically it. And any other belief kind of like dwindles in comparison. But we're filled with these smaller beliefs which kind of build these standards. And if we kind of like shift these standards in a way to match our ideal self, then ultimately we explore ourselves through these standards and we get rid of all the beliefs, because the current moment dictates whether the standard actually is acceptable or not. And it changes them automatically to something like expresses thoroughly who we are. Wow, it's a video, isn't it?